want to talk today about two of my favorite people in American history. I'm smiling a little bit because one of them is George Washington, so first president of the United States, leader of the Revolution, American Revolution. So that one's probably not a big surprise. The other one is, and I say it somewhat jokingly, is Derek Jeter. So baseball player, Hall of Famer from the New York Yankees. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about both of them, and you'll see the connection point here and a greater point that I think is an important one, particularly in the time we're in right now, with all the protests and the issues we have as a country. So let me start with Derek Jeter. So Derek Jeter was an amazing baseball player, by all accounts. Hall of Famer, as I mentioned. Lots of things to talk about with him. But one of the things that's probably most notable about Derek Jeter, the thing that people talk about the most, he wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the biggest, he didn't have the strongest arm, he wasn't a big home run hitter. You know, the thing about Derek Jeter, people always said, is there was no like defining characteristics about him. But one of the things that did stand out was his ability to perform when it mattered most, in the clutch, which in baseball terms, that's typically the playoffs, but big games in the regular season, or even just with two strikes. Right? You think about the psychology of the pressure that comes when, you know, you have two strikes, or it's the bottom of the ninth inning, or it's the playoffs, or the World Series, what have you. What Derek Jeter said about that, I always found really, really interesting. What he said was, when he was in those moments, when the pressure was on, what he thinks made him good in those moments, right? I would say great. He was relatively humble, so he probably wouldn't say that. But what made him so special in those moments is the only thing he was able to do, the most important thing he was able to do, is he was able to get his mind to a place where he treated it like any other moment, right? He didn't let the moment overwhelm him. He didn't psych himself out. If it was spring training, first inning, 3-0 count, he would act the same way then as he would in the World Series, ninth inning, two strikes. And you think about that, and it's such a simple thing, but such a profound thing, right? The ability to not be overwhelmed by the moment, to stay within yourself, just focus kind of on your objective and what you're trying to do, and control your mind in that way is really an amazing thing. And the results speak for themselves. The things he was able to do, again, particularly when the pressure was on, it was unlike most other baseball players or athletes or really people that we've ever seen. So that skill, that ability to detach from the moment, stay super laser focused on what you're trying to do, and just focus on that. It was really what made him special. So that's Derek Jeter. Let's talk about George Washington for a second. So George Washington, obviously, first president of the United States, as I mentioned. Lots of amazing things about him. The thing that I've always found most amazing, and it certainly gets a lot of attention, but I don't think nearly enough, because I think arguably it was one of, if not the single most important act in the history of our country, is the fact that he actually twice willingly gave up power. So the two instances are at the end of the American Revolution, once we won. He was in a position where, by all accounts, if he wanted to, he could have been king of America. And there's a famous quote that I believe is accurate, that he said that, I didn't defeat King George III to become King George I, meaning, I have no interest in being a king. And that's special in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, the mindset of like wanting to give democracy a chance, or at that time, a republic and whatever was being developed, and understanding the dangers of having a king, right, and all that. But really, it's that ability to, I would argue, similar parallel to Derek Jeter. Not that they're the same, but just same vein. To not be overwhelmed by the moment, to be able to remove yourself from it, not let it get, too big, and stay focused on the objective in which you wanted to achieve. So in his case, it was, the power needs to be with the people. We don't need another king. And the temptation to seize that power appears to be such a natural instinct in humans, that power is what we seek. And when you get it, you don't give it up. You build more of it, you protect it. For him to give up that power again after the American Revolution, and then after the Constitution was actually passed and he was elected as president and served his 2 terms, again, he had full ability to continue to be president, really for as long as he probably would have wanted to. But again, after his 2nd term, he walked away willingly and gave up power again because he believed it was the right thing to do for the country. And again, that cannot be overstated, how amazing of a feat that is. And I compare it to Derek Jeter, again, not in the same scale or importance or anything like that, but you can almost relate to it more when you think of it in terms of a baseball player in Derek Jeter. The temptation, the instinct, the human nature to be overwhelmed by nerves in a moment. It's almost, you can't, there's nothing you could do about it, right? It's inescapable. You're in the biggest of settings, the World Series, everything's on the line. To control, to have such control over yourself and your emotions and your feelings and your thought processes, etc., to say, I'm going to stay in the moment, I'm going to treat this like any other at bat I've ever been to, it seems somewhat superhuman, right? For most of us that have, done something in front of a crowd, you can appreciate how nervous you get. To think of it as any other moment seems superhuman. So multiply that by 1,000, but the same vein. To go against every human instinct we have, to have all the power you could ever want right in front of you for the taking. People are giving it to you. And for you to push it away and say, no, that's not what I want. I'm not going to do it. For you to have that control and to go against human nature in that way, it's frankly, it's amazing. I've always been amazed by it. And I thought of it recently because in the times that we're in, that dynamic of power and what you do when you have that power, I think is so important. There's a phrase that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there's this belief that when people get power, it changes you. Again, as I mentioned before, you start to act differently, you start to protect that power, you start to exploit that power. There's a famous experiment, the Stanford Prison Experiment. There's actually a movie on it on Netflix. If you've never heard about it or seen it, it's a good movie to watch. And I won't get into the specifics of it, maybe on another video, but it really does a great job of illustrating the effect power has on people and the normal effect, right? And doing all those things. And what I've started to realize in this time, you could look at it through the lens of a bad cop. They have power, they have authority. And in the instance of a bad cop, like this cop that there are these cops that murdered George Floyd, you can kind of see that coming in. Your judgment gets skewed. You start thinking you're bigger than you are. You start thinking there's no consequences. You can do whatever you want. And sadly, more than we'd like to see, that's what people do with power. We see it with politicians. We see it with celebrities. We see it with all different people. Take a Harvey Weinstein. You can go down the list, and those are the big ones. It happens at a smaller scale too, where people get power, and their inclination, the human nature is, I will exploit that power. I will seize that power. I will protect it. And you see politicians who protect their base and they don't do the right thing because they're more worried about getting elected. And it's just all the bad things. A lot of the bad things you see in the world, I think, come back to that power dynamic. And what I think George Washington teaches us is that maybe the greatest thing you can do, or one of the greatest things you could do, is to stay humble. To stay humble, stay consistent, like a Derek Jeter, right? Stay humble, stay consistent in spite of the power you have. If you can do that, if you can use that power to empower others, to help others, to lift other people up, which is, again, so counter to what our human instinct feels when we get power. The people that can do that are, I think, the people that really change the world and make a difference. And I just think it's so important for us to remember as a people, wherever you sit in the spectrum, because things swing, there's pendulums, there's all different power dynamics. Somebody who's not in power one day all of a sudden gets thrust into a position of power the next day, and people don't think about how to handle it. I think it's so important. I've talked about recently, be the change you want to see in the world. I think it's so important for us to think about that when we're in some sort of position of power, to really challenge ourselves and make sure that, hey, now we have the opportunity. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do? Are we going to exploit it? Are we going to use it for our own benefit? Or are we going to go the unnatural route? Are we going to go the George Washington route and say, you know what? I'm going to use it to be the change I want to see in the world. I'm going to use it to actually make a difference. As unbelievably hard as that is, that's the thing that really matters and makes a difference.